For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised.
Up to now, we've covered the idea of worldviews in general and the biblical worldview in particular. Before we look at the humanistic worldview, with my analysis of the secular mind, I want to outline from the perspective of the biblical worldview how we got to where we are today with the different basic types of worldviews on offer. In the area of biology that deals with classification of plants and animals, those who do the classifying can be themselves classified into two groups, known as splitters and lumpers. The splitters multiply species through seeing every slight variation as needing a different classification. The lumpers reduce the number of species by seeing the same differences as simply variations within a broader group. In terms of classifying worldviews, I'm a lumper. I've read the works of splitters who see about 8 different worldviews in what I call the humanistic worldview. I think splitters confuse people. In one way, they're helpful because they draw attention to the idea of worldviews and, in fact, may have a very clear understanding of worldviews. However, in another way, they're not, because they unnecessarily fragment things and so fail to clarify the big picture, focusing on cosmetic differences rather than fundamental ideas which are held in common. The biblical worldview was the worldview held by Adam and Eve. Of course, until the rebellion or the fall occurred, corruption and the need for redemption were not part of it, except in the mind of God. So while there have been some historic additions to the worldview, the way Christians should see things today and the way Adam and Eve did originally should effectively be the same. So let's remind ourselves of this worldview. Here's the picture that represents the basic ideas regarding the relationship between the Creator and the creation. The triangle represents God. The circle represents the total creation. Only God is outside the circle. Only God is uncreated being. Everything other than God is within the circle. Everything within the circle is a creature, is created being. A creature being something created. The arrow on the left side of the circle represents not only the idea that God created the creation, but that the creation had a beginning. It's not eternal. Only God is eternal. The arrow to the right indicates time as linear, going from a creation to a consummation. The hand underneath the circle represents the idea that God sustains or holds the creation together moment by moment. Its continued existence depends moment by moment on his present continuous action. The arrow coming down and piercing the circle represents the idea that God can speak and act into his creation, whenever and however he chooses. The relationship arrows indicate the relationships we have and which at this point were unbroken. This picture represents the way things were at the end of the creation week and for a short time thereafter. Everything was harmonious. The words spiritual, physical indicate the creation has 2 fundamental modes of existence, spirit and matter, shown here by 2 circles representing the 2 basic modes of the creation. They overlap in man, who I've indicated already is a unique composite of the 2 modes. Now the question arises, how did we get from this worldview, which was held by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, to the situation we're in today, where clearly it's not held by the majority of Adam and Eve's present-day descendants? The major event to change things was the fall. This has not only added things historically to the biblical worldview, for example, sin and corruption, suffering and sorrow, punishment and salvation, and everything that has to do with these things. It's also the kick-off point for all other worldviews. Every other worldview is in essence an expression of the rebellion of man against his maker. Man the rebel now shakes his fist at God and shifts his focus from God to man, from heaven to earth, from the Creator to the creation. As our focus shifts to the creation, the Creator gets increasingly squeezed out of the picture. So God disappears from view and the creation occupies it all.
And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will surely die." Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, 'You must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die.'" "You will not surely die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat of it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it.
At the heart of the rebellion against God at the fall was the claim by man to be God. Eve, by submitting to the deception and choosing to rebel, put herself above God in authority, making herself the final authority and thus God. Whenever you disobey an authority, you're implicitly saying there's a higher authority which you obey instead. Obedience to this higher authority justifies disobeying the lower one. Peter and John before the Sanhedrin in Acts 5 voiced a classic case of this.
We must obey God rather than men.
On the basis of obedience to God, a command of man in opposition to the command of God was to be disobeyed. Flashpoints throughout history for individuals who believe in the Lord have often focused on the clash between the requirements of God versus the requirements of man. Which authority will be submitted to? Numerous cases of this are given in the Bible. The Israelite midwives in Egypt did not kill the male children as commanded by Pharaoh, and God rewarded them. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got thrown in the furnace because they would not bow to King Nebuchadnezzar's image. Daniel got thrown to the lions because he refused to stop praying to God as a newly passed law of the Medes and the Persians required. The persecution of Christians in Rome was over the question of authority. Was Caesar the deified personification of the state, Lord, or was Jesus Lord? Just a tinsy bit of incense to acknowledge the lordship of Caesar, the lordship of the state that is, and you could avoid facing the lions. We increasingly face the same challenge. In Eve's case, the authority she deemed to be the lower authority was in fact the highest authority possible, the Creator himself. She had in effect dethroned him and enthroned herself as the highest authority. Discovering the highest authority acknowledged by a person is another way of identifying their God. In the temptation, God was accused of being a liar, the original case of projection. And yet a number of lies were peddled and believed at the initiation of human rebellion. Not least among them was this one, that through rebelling, godhood would be obtained, and thus freedom from the constraints of a God who is over us and sets the rules for us. Both God and his world, however, are real, not lies nor illusion. If we believe the lies and deny the Creator, then we are out of line with reality. We'll find God's world hems us in and produces all sorts of problems for our understanding of things. And thus, right at the start of the formation of alternative worldviews expressing rebellion, we run up against God's real world. God is the ultimate authority, whether we like it or not, but we removed him as the ultimate authority from our thinking. This is obvious as we look at human society, and is convenient for a rebellious man because it means he can pretend he rules. What's not so obvious is that at the same time as we removed him as the ultimate authority, we also removed him as the ultimate reality, something which has profound implications for the formation of worldviews. God is not only the ultimate authority, he's also what can be called the ultimate reality. And by ultimate reality, I mean that from which everything derives. These concepts of ultimate authority and ultimate reality are very important in understanding the difference between Christianity and humanism. Ultimate authority refers to that authority which is back of all authorities, the authority that gives meaning to all lesser authorities and from which they each derive their subordinate authority. A very clear 2011 illustration of this chain of command question is that regarding the as yet unresolved and largely unaddressed eligibility of Barack Obama to be President of the United States. If in fact Obama is not eligible on any of several grounds, then he's a usurper and the authority he carries is illegitimate. The complete military chain of command breaks down, as no military order is constitutionally valid, and military personnel are in a bind as they have sworn to uphold the Constitution and obey constitutionally valid commands. Colonel Terry Lakin tried every which way open to him to check Obama's eligibility because if Obama is ineligible, Lakin claimed he was being required to obey illegal orders. Finally, he forced the issue by refusing to obey deployment orders. He was court-martialed, found guilty, and sent to prison, and deprived of all military benefits. The military court refused to allow him to use the issue of Obama's eligibility in his defense and simply assumed Obama was, in fact, legitimate. Obama, by refusing to verify his eligibility, has allowed Lakin to be imprisoned. Says something about the man. So that is ultimate authority. Ultimate reality, on the other hand, refers to that reality which is back of all reality, the reality from which everything else derives, that which is the prime reality. This doesn't mean that we are less real than God, who is ultimate reality. We're not. We're just as real as God is. If something is real, it's real. There are no incremental gradations of realness from unreal to really real. There may be many areas where differences exist between us and God, but realness is not one of them. It's just that God and His real, uncreated being self-exist, and we in our real, created being, along with every other real created thing, are dependent on the real God who made us. God is the source of everything, the real being behind all real beings. He is ultimate reality. Now, to build a worldview with any sort of coherence, you must have an ultimate reality. Thus, if God, the true ultimate reality, is removed, you have to find something else to take His place. As with objects of worship, once the true object of worship is removed, there's only one place you can find an alternative to the true ultimate reality, and that is within the creation. The new ultimate reality can only be part of the creation because that's all that's left once God is removed from consideration. As its ultimate reality that's being looked for, that is the reality at the base of everything, the search for an alternative will eventually come back to the very basic structures of the creation. And this being so,
Houston, we have a problem.
The creation in its basic structure is made up of two non-reducible modes. The physical is physical and can't be reduced to spirit. Spirit is spirit and can't be reduced to matter. Each are primary parts of the creation, of created reality. So we're faced with these two basic materials which the creation is made of, but we only want one. You can only have one ultimate reality. That's what ultimate in this sense means. So a tension is set up between the two basic modes of existence, and the tendency is to move towards one or the other. Just as God moved off the screen as we zoomed in on the creation, so now the same happens in regards to the modes of existence. One dominates at the expense of the other, until eventually, if we follow the logic, the other is dispensed with altogether in our thinking, the same way God was. And this brings us right to the basis of the alternative worldviews we face every day. Those who squeeze out the physical mode are left with spirit as ultimate reality. All forms of Eastern mysticism have this as their base. When you boil everything down to its nuts and bolts, what you have is spirit. In Eastern mysticism, matter is illusion, or maya, is not real. Those who squeeze out spirit are left with matter or material, physical stuff as ultimate reality. They're called materialists, and they've dominated Western culture over the past 150 or so years. Materialists deny the reality of spirit. The words materialist and materialism used in this way shouldn't be confused with the more popular uses of the word, which have to do with a covetous attitude towards and accumulation of material possessions. I'm thinking about philosophical materialism. That said, if material is what life's all about, it makes sense to get as much of it as you can. As the bumper sticker reads, "He who dies with the most toys wins." For the materialist, there's no such thing as spirit. When you boil everything down to nuts and bolts, you have matter, energy in some form. What Christians take to be evidence of spirit is to the materialist the result of molecules in motion. For example, Christians take thought as being an evidence of spirit because they say it's not physical. A materialist, however, has said the brain secretes thought as the liver secretes bile. In other words, thought is simply a byproduct, or epiphenomenon as it's called, of the electrochemical interactions in the brain. Its source is matter. There's no such thing as mind, there's only brain, said materialist and world-leading evolutionist, the late Dr. Stephen Jay Gould, in his 1990 Living Treasure lecture at Victoria University, Wellington, New Zealand.
That there in fact is only a realm of matter, that what we call spirit and mind is a manifestation of the action of matter in its most complex form in the human brain. Because what we call mind is a delusion. There's no separate entity of mind, there's simply brain, which in its complex workings produces consciousness.
Or as evolutionary biologist Anthony Cashmore said,
conscious thought is simply a reflection of, rather than an influence on, unconscious neural activity which directs behaviour.
Of course, if this is so, then this statement containing some of Cashmore's conscious thought also reflects unconscious neural activity, so isn't true in any meaningful sense and shouldn't be taken seriously, as it just represents the unconscious firing of Cashmore's neurons. It's just another case of a materialist shooting themselves in the foot, or perhaps in this case, in the head. This picture represents the way things were at the end of the creation week and for a short time thereafter. Everything was harmonious. Now the question arises, how did we get from this worldview, which was held by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, to the situation we're in today, where clearly it's not held by the majority of Adam and Eve's present-day descendants? The major event to change things was the fall. This has not only added things historically to the biblical worldview, for example, sin and corruption, suffering and sorrow, punishment and salvation, and everything that has to do with these things. It's also the kick-off point for all other worldviews. Every other worldview is in essence an expression of the rebellion of man against his maker.